Hi my friends, I'm Mike and welcome to the Lion's Lounge, where today we're going to be sampling 7 different varieties of Mr. Black coffee liqueur. They're not a sponsor of this video, but I'm a huge fan of the brand and I've been wanting to do something like this for a while. Each of these has their own characteristics, so I'm going to try them out by themselves and then I'm going to make a coffee old-fashioned using them. If you don't know anything about Mr. Black, they are both coffee roasters and distillers. They source 100% Arabica beans that they roast themselves, and then they turn that into their coffee liqueur. Over the years, they started doing different blends sourcing from Colombia, Ethiopia, and then started getting into other types of coffee liqueurs like this Amaro. But we'll get a little bit more into this as we do our tasting. So without further ado, let's get into it. So first off, we have the original Mr. Black, which is the most widely available. This is one you can get at a good deal of liquor stores, so I highly recommend you try it. So I'm gonna get just a tiny little taste just to sample the flavors to figure out exactly how I wanna build this cocktail. Oh, it's fantastic. What I like about Mr. Black compared to other types of coffee liqueurs is that it really just tastes like coffee. A lot of coffee liqueurs will have some sort of sweetener to it to take away the edge of that bitterness. And don't get me wrong, there is a little bit of sweetness here, but the majority of it is that coffee flavor, which makes this perfect by itself, but also an incredible component in mixing a cocktail. Because if you want to make a cocktail just a little sweeter, it's a lot easier to add some simple syrup or something like that than it is to have a liqueur that's already too sweet, and then you have to figure out how to balance based off of that. In terms of notes, you get the bitterness of that dark coffee, and then just a tad bit of sweetness at the very end to help even it out. Okay, next up we have the single origin sourced from Colombia. Smells a little bit more bitter. Yeah, this is a little bit more bitter, a lot stronger of a profile, so whatever liquor I'm planning on pairing with this needs to stand up to that powerful taste. Now we have the single origin sourced from Ethiopia. Smells a little lighter than the last one. Okay, let's give it a try. It is about the same in terms of flavor profile. It is stronger. Ooh. At the tail end, you do get some sweetness that the last one didn't really have. It was still a little sweet, but this one is a lot sweeter at the tail end. So this one, I can probably get something that isn't as high in proof to pair with it. Okay, we're following this up with the Mr. Black Coffee Amaro. Now, if you don't know what Amaro is, it's an herbal liqueur that is essentially an aperitif. You typically have that before you eat to help with your appetite. There's a lot of cocktails that call for aperitifs. One of the most popular ones is the Boulevardier, which calls for Campari. This would be a great substitute in that scenario, but I might be going with something different here. Okay, you get some sweetness and there's just a small hint of that herbaceousness. Ooh. Yeah, this one is a lot more impactful. You get those herbal notes a lot stronger that hit you. It is still a little sweet, and the coffee definitely shines through, but you want to make sure that you're pairing some good ingredients with this because you don't want to use a lot of the Amaro in your cocktail because it will overpower everything else. Okay, the next 3 are going to be Mr. Black that has been aged in different casks. And the first one has been rested in Whistle Pig Rye Whiskey barrels. So you would expect this to have just a bit of a rye whiskey note on the very tail end. Definitely a hint of a spice, so let's give it a taste. Oh yeah, that whiskey spice is definitely there. I wouldn't say it's a hint. It's kind of in your face. Again, coffee definitely shines through here. It's a fantastic pairing is coffee and whiskey. Doesn't matter if it's rye whiskey, doesn't matter if it's Irish whiskey, doesn't matter if it's Scotch. It's always a great pairing. The next one has been rested in Bundaberg rum barrels. I hope I pronounced that right. Rum is typically a little sweeter than whiskey, so I would expect this to be a little sweeter than the last one. Definitely smells sweeter. Yeah, it's a lot sweeter. You get that sugar cane that shines through. Coffee's still present. This is one I can totally see you drinking by itself on the rocks because it's already sweet, does have that coffee flavor. It's very good. And last up, we have their most recent bottle that literally just dropped. This one has been rested in Mezcal barrels from Illegal Mezcal. Unlike standard tequila, Mezcal is known to be a lot smokier, so I would expect that it would be a smokier coffee liqueur. There is some smoke there, but it's like a sweet, smoky smell. Oh yeah, it's really great. The Mezcal is not up front in your face. It gently transitions to that smokiness. So initially you get that coffee taste, and then it slowly transitions into the smoky notes that Mezcal is known for. Again, this is one I can totally see you drinking by itself on the rocks. It's perfectly fine as is. But as I said at the beginning of this video, I want to make a series of cold brew old fashions out of all these different Mr. Blacks. And in the case of the original, it's pretty easy because there's already a recipe that exists. This being simply the cold brew old fashioned. So all these drinks you're going to build in the glass, and for this one, you're going to start with 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of Mr. Black coffee liqueur. Then 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of a rye whiskey. In this case, I'm using Whistle Pig Piggyback. It's around 47%, so it's strong but not overly strong. And lastly, 2 dashes of Angostura bitters. Add a big ice cube and stir for about 30 seconds. Then I'm just going to garnish it with an orange peel. And there you have the cold brew old fashioned. Cheers. This is a fantastic cocktail. Up front you have the bite of the orange from the spritz that then transitions into that rye whiskey where you get those spice notes, and then finishes with the coffee liqueur where you get that sweetness and the bitterness. Overall, it's a fantastic cocktail and one I'll have every now and then when I don't feel like making myself an espresso martini. Okay, next up we're gonna make a cold brew old fashioned using the Colombia sourced Mr. Black. For this one, because the flavor profile is a little stronger, I want to balance it with a little bit of sweetness, and I'm going to go with a higher proofed bourbon in this case, which I decided to go with Knob Creek small batch, which is 100 proof. So I'm hoping this will balance out the bitterness in this specific Mr. Black. So just like before, you're going to build this in the glass, and you're going to start with 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of your 100 proof bourbon. Next, 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of Mr. Black single origin Colombia. And lastly, 2 dashes of Angostura bitters. Add your ice and stir for about 30 seconds. And just like before, garnish it with an orange peel. All right, this is the cold brew old fashioned using the Mr. Black single origin Colombia. Cheers. Whew. Yeah, this is still very strong, but the good thing is I can actually taste the bourbon, and I think that's because I chose with a higher proof option. I would be interested to see if I went with something a little sweeter, because Knob Creek is sweet, but it's a little more spicy than it is sweet. This one is definitely a sipper. It will kick you in the face when you sip it because you get the strong spice notes from that Knob Creek, and then you get the powerful bitterness from this specific Mr. Black. So it's a very strong tasting drink in addition to a higher proof one. Overall, pretty happy with this one. Moving right along to the Mr. Black single origin Ethiopia, and this one was a little sweeter, wasn't as strong as the previous one, so I decided to still go with bourbon, but in this case a lower proof bourbon that is a little milder. And this is the Elijah Craig small batch, which is 94 proof, which still sounds like a lot, but trust me, this is a much milder bourbon. So like before, I'm going to start with 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of my bourbon. Next, 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of the Mr. Black single origin Ethiopia. And lastly, 2 dashes of Angostura bitters. Add some ice and stir for 30 seconds. And then of course, I'm gonna garnish with an orange peel. All right, this is the cold brew old fashioned using the Mr. Black single origin Ethiopia. Cheers. Definitely a lot sweeter than the last one. The coffee notes shine through a lot more on this version. And what's interesting is that there is some lingering sweetness, and the components here really mix well with this spritz of the orange because it kind of has an orange note to it, even though there is no orange liqueur here. And I really think it's because of the bourbon. This specific bourbon is perfect to make an old fashioned with. It's bitter, but not overly bitter. Sweet, but not overly sweet. It's a much more balanced version compared to the Colombia blend version, but still I'd say not as strong as the first one. So if I had to compare all three that I made, I would say this is a good one to give somebody who hasn't had a coffee old fashioned before. The original Mr. Black is a good next step up, and the Colombia one is if you want to give somebody something that is a lot more in your face and they want to sip it over a longer period of time. So this next one is going to be a little different than the first three that I made, mainly because I'm using an Amaro compared to just a standard coffee liqueur. Because of the herbal notes in this Amaro, I want to use something that will be able to handle that powerful flavor. So in this case, I'm using Rittenhouse Bottle and Bond Rye Whiskey. This is 100 proof, so it's 50% alcohol, and it has a pretty strong flavor profile. So I think this is gonna go really well with this Amaro. And then I'm doing something a little different at the end with the Garnish. So with this one, I'm gonna do 2 ounces or 60 milliliters of the Mr. Black Amaro. Then 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of a 100 proof Rye Whiskey. And lastly, just a dash of Angostura bitters. Add your ice and stir for about 30 seconds. And for this one, I'm gonna garnish it with 2 Luxardo Maraschino cherries. And there you have a riff on another cocktail called the Full Monty, which I am going to dub the Mr. Black Monte. Cheers. Oh yeah, this is perfect as is. Rye whiskey and Amaro are a fantastic pairing, and in this case, because it is a coffee Amaro, not only are you getting those herbal notes that Amaros are known for, but you're also getting the bitterness of coffee, and then the rye whiskey is adding some spice notes to it. So this is a pretty complex cocktail that is not really one I'd give to somebody who isn't a huge cocktail fan. This is not something that you can chug, it is a sipper. But as someone who typically does sip their cocktails, this is perfect for me. Out of all the ones I've made so far tonight, this is my favorite. So now we're getting into the Mr. Black Rested series, with the first one being the Whistle Pig Whiskey Cask Rested one. So it only makes sense to use a Whistle Pig rye whiskey when I make this cocktail. So this one I'm gonna start off with 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of Mr. Black Whiskey Barrel Rested Liqueur. Then 2 ounces or 60 milliliters of Whistle Pig Piggyback. You can use a different rye whiskey, but I'm going with this because it's more on theme. And lastly, 2 dashes of Angostura bitters. Add your big ice cube and stir for around 30 seconds. Then of course, garnish with an orange peel. And this is the Mr. Black Whiskey Cold Brew Old Fashioned. Cheers. Out of all of them, this is the spiciest one. I would say that the spice notes in this scenario are a little overpowering. The orange maybe contributing to that. This is a little strong for me in terms of flavor profile, not proof. I've had this by itself and it's really good. But in this specific scenario, I would say that you might want to cut back on the rye whiskey and probably make it even. Do a 1-to-1 ratio in this scenario because the rye whiskey is kind of overpowering the Mr. Black, which is not that great. It's not terrible, but I would say, yeah, make it about even. Yeah, it's strong. So now we have the Mr. Black Rum Rested Liqueur. So based on the last cocktail, I decided to scale back on the rum and make it an even split, where I would do a 1-to-1 ratio. So for this one, I'm gonna do 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of Mr. Black Rum Barrel Rested Liqueur. Next, 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of a Demerara rum, which in this case, I am using El Dorado 5-year. I'm hoping because Demerara rums tend to be a little sweeter that this will go perfectly with this coffee liqueur. And lastly, of course, 2 dashes of Angostura bitters. Add your ice and stir for about 30 seconds. Garnish with an orange peel. So here we have the Rum Cold Brew Old Fashioned. Cheers. This one's leagues better than the last one. Definitely was a good idea to kind of split the ratio because you do get those coffee notes, but you still get the sweetness from the rum. It's an interesting combination because in this scenario, I would say that the rum is providing sort of a supporting role. I definitely get that sort of brown sugary molasses flavor here that is making this coffee liqueur a little sweeter, but I am still getting a little bit of rum notes, which I'm assuming is because I used rum and then also because this is a rum rested coffee liqueur. It's a great flavor profile. This is a fantastic sipper. I think if I was gonna make the whiskey one again, I would do the same thing. I would split the ratio. And now for our final cocktail of this evening, we have the Mr. Black that has been rested in Mezcal barrels. So just like the last one, I am splitting the ratio where I'm using the Mr. Black coffee liqueur combined with some reposado tequila, which the inspiration here was a Oaxaca Old Fashioned, which is typically reposado tequila, mezcal, and Angostura bitters. And I'm gonna be following a similar formula, but I'm gonna be adding a little bit of a change at the very end. So first up, add 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of your Mr. Black Mezcal rested liqueur. Then 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of a reposado tequila, which in this case I'm using Don Julio. Then I'm going to do a dash of Angostura bitters and a dash of Angostura cocoa bitters. In this case, I'm hoping that the cocoa bitters adds a sort of unique note at the very end. Chocolate tends to round things out, and I'd be really interested how this works with the reposado tequila and then the smokiness of this coffee liqueur. Chocolate and coffee usually goes really well together. Add your ice and stir for around 30 seconds. Garnish with an orange peel. And there we have the Mezcal cold brew old fashioned. Cheers. Okay, so this is probably my second favorite cocktail of this evening. The coffee liqueur is present, you get that smokiness. Not up front, I would say it's like the second flavor that you get. The tequila is there, but it's not the star of the show. It is providing a little bit of oakiness. I'd say that comes in at the tail end. The chocolate is not really there, but as I kind of thought, it rounds out the edges here. So there is sort of a whisper of a chocolatey flavor that makes this incredibly amazing. This combination has sort of reduced the intensity of that smokiness. It's still there, but it's sort of a combination of flavors that works really well together. As I mentioned earlier, there's already this precedent of a Oaxaca Old Fashioned where you use a reposado tequila and a mezcal. And in this scenario, I figured that this specific coffee liqueur mixed with a reposado tequila would be an incredible match. Angostura bitters is usually a standard when you're making an old fashioned, but in this case, I wanted to try using a cocoa bitters because I figured that for this specific scenario, you're having some smokiness, you're having the coffee liqueur, you're having the sweetness and oakiness of the reposado tequila. I wanted to see how the cocoa bitters would combine with this, and I'm surprised to see it actually works extremely well. So if I had to rate all the cocktails that I made tonight, I would say that the Amaro one is the best one out of all of them. This one is my second favorite, and then probably the original cold brew old fashioned is very good. I still have the Amaro cocktail right here, and yeah, it's still the best. It's leaps and bounds better than anything else that I made. But try them for yourself and let me know what you think in the comments below. This is a newer type of format than other videos I've made before, so if you're interested in me getting different variations of the same brand, trying it out, and making cocktails from it, let me know as well in the comments. If you want to see what I make outside this channel, follow me on Twitter at Mr. Spacelion or Instagram at Mr.Spacelion. But friends, thank you so much for stopping by the Lion's Lounge. I've been your bartender, Mike, and I hope to see you next time.